we're so grateful to have each other today. And it's a blessing that we have in the archives Nicole Crabbe, who's going to speak to us today about the Moravian mission ship, the Irene. Nicole.
Thank you. Okay. I'd like to preface this presentation by saying there's very little in the way of primary sources in our archives regarding the Irene. The Irene and our time in Wachovia did not overlap a lot, but you'll see there is some connection between the two. The bare bones of this presentation, including dates, places, and passengers, come from John W. Jordan's paper, Moravian Immigration into Pennsylvania, 1734 to 1767, with some account of the transport vessels, published in Volume 5 of the Transactions of the Moravian Historical Society, 1899. John Jordan himself utilized newspapers and the Bethlehem archive to compile his information on the voyages of Irene. I have taken this information and expanded on it, giving a little more background and information for clarity. In 1741, after a failed attempt at establishing a Moravian settlement in Savannah, Georgia, the Moravian Church purchased land in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania, what Zinzendorf would later name Bethlehem. Soon after, they also acquired the settlement of Nazareth, just north of Bethlehem. From these settlements, the Moravians would take the gospel to both the natives and the unchurched German immigrants in the area. The leaders of the church wasted no time in organizing 2 colonies in Europe to serve that purpose. These colonies would later be known as the First and Second Sea Congregations. John Breckenstein, in his paper, The First Sea Congregation, A.D. 1742, published in Volume 1 of the Transactions of the Moravian Historical Society, 1876, describes the sea congregations. Our forefathers never failed to introduce, among the passengers on board the vessel, a complete social and religious organization. Regular times were set apart in these floating congregations for their various religious meetings. The days spent on the ocean were not to be wasted in idleness or inactivity, but must be employed in preparing, instructing, and invigorating their minds, and in promoting their growth in grace. The next issue facing the church, however, was how to get these sea congregations to America. 18th century sea travel was an arduous undertaking. Sea travel for immigrants was notoriously bad. Even before boarding the ship, German immigrants had to make the long trip to the sea. Jordan writes, from Württemberg to Holland, 36 custom houses had to be passed. The journey occupied 4 to 5 weeks, and the provisions and money were often consumed and exhausted before reaching the ship. Unquote. Conditions on the ship were often miserable for the average immigrant. Overcrowded ships, both humans and livestock, sickness, little food and water, dank, dark quarters, foul smells, not to mention the inherent dangers of the sea and weather often made sea travel treacherous. Gottlieb Mittelberger, in his book, Journey to Pennsylvania in the year 1750 and Return to Germany in the year 1754, gives a grim view of sea travel. Quote, during the voyage, there is on board these ships terrible misery, stench, fumes, vomiting, fever, dysentery, headache, boils, scurvy, cancer, mouth rot, and the like, all of which come from old and sharply salted food and meat, also from the bad and foul water, so that many die miserably. Add to this want of provisions, frost, heat, dampness, anxiety, afflictions, and lamentations, together with other trouble. As example, the lice abound so frightfully, especially on the sick people, that they can be scraped off the body. The misery reaches a climax when a gale rages for 2 or 3 nights and days, so that everyone believes that the ship will go to the bottom with all human beings on board. In such a visitation, the people cry and pray most piteously. Unquote. Middleburger goes on to say 32 children died during his voyage and were thrown in the sea to be devoured by sea monsters. Things did not improve once they reached America. Those who were unable to pay for their passage remained on board until they were sold as indentured servants. So how could the Moravians get their members to America safely and economically, with their morals and religious purpose intact? The solution was to provide church-owned transport vessels. Again, John Jordan. When, however, the church organized colonies, she invariably provided vessels of her own, from considerations of economy and out of regard for their comfort, more particularly from a reluctance to expose her members, for whose spiritual welfare she was concerned, to the hurtful influences of promiscuous association during the tedious weeks and months of the sea voyage. Not all Moravians traveled to America on Moravian ships, but several large sea congregations did. From Jordan. There were 4 vessels: the Catherine, 1742, Little Strength, 1743 through 44, the Irene, 1748 to 58, and the Hope, 1760 to circa 1767, owned by the church. Their crews, but with few exceptions, were members or connected with the church. In build, they were snows. In sailing, a snow is a square-rigged vessel with 2 masts, complemented by a snow or a trysail stepped immediately behind the main mast. Each ship carried 2 to 4 cannons and small arms as well, though as we will see, it did a little good. The first sea congregation was brought over in 1742 on the Moravian ship Catherine. Catherine was purchased by Bishop August Spangenberg in London in 1742 and was sold soon after arrival in Philadelphia, the proceeds of which helping with the establishment of Bethlehem. The second sea congregation was brought over in 1743 on the Moravian ship Little Strength. The Little Strength was purchased in spring 1743 in London by Nicholas Garrison Sr. Captain Nicholas Garrison was born on Staten Island in 1701. In his early 20s, Garrison took command of a ship in the West Indies trade. In 1736, Bishop Spangenberg, on a return trip from St. Thomas, took passage on Captain Garrison's ship, and the men quickly formed a friendship. A few years later, Captain Garrison met Zinzendorf on St. Thomas, and that meeting left a lasting impression. Soon after enduring capture and imprisonment by the Spanish, Nicholas Garrison left the West Indies trade and returned to Staten Island. There he was visited by Zinzendorf, and in January 1743 was asked to be the captain of the Second Sea Congregation. Garrison agreed and accompanied Zinzendorf to Europe, where he joined the Moravian Church. The Little Strength, under command of Captain Garrison, sailed from England on October 2nd, 1743, with 133 passengers, and arrived at Staten Island on November 26th. In March 1744, the Little Strength left New York, bound for Amsterdam, with her crew and 7 passengers on board, including Bishop David Nitschmann. On May 1st, the Little Strength was taken over by Spanish privateers. Privateers were armed ships owned and officered by private individuals holding government commissions, and they were authorized for use in war, especially in the capture of enemy merchant ships. On May 7, 1744, the Moravian prisoners were taken to San Sebastian, Spain, where they were later exchanged and released. The Little Strength was a total loss for the church. With the need for more colonists growing, Zinzendorf Spangenberg, superintendent of the Church in America, and Captain Garrison decided the church should have a vessel built in New York under Captain Garrison's supervision. In October 1744, after consulting with Timothy Horsfield and Thomas Noble, 2 prominent New York Moravians, the Moravian Church contracted with John Van Deventer, a reputable shipbuilder based on Staten Island, to build the vessel. Van Deventer was responsible for building the hull, masts, and set the rigging. Thomas Noble, acting as financial agent, would arrange to have the rigging, cables, and anchors brought over from England. The initial plan was to bring the single brethren from Pennsylvania to do the joiner work inside the cabin, but that fell through due to construction in Bethlehem. The brethren in America did not fail to keep Zinzendorf up to speed on the ship's progress. The following extracts are from a letter dated July 2nd, 1748, to Zinzendorf, from Bishop Johann Friedrich Hemmerhoff, assistant to Bishop Spangenberg in America, transcribed by Jordan. We have endeavored to conduct the whole project agreeably with your best views. Spangenberg has done the same and always acted strictly according to your wishes. After Noble's death in 1746, Timothy Horsfield was authorized to continue the work, but no money coming from abroad, and there being none in the hands of Brother Noble's firm, Spangenberg was compelled to obtain a loan in New York at 7% interest. The loan will be repaid by Spangenberg from the bequest made to him in Thomas Noble's will. Spangenberg received 1,082 pounds from Thomas Noble in his will, 823 of which, roughly 15,000 in today's currency, he donated towards the building of Irene. By this means, all charges were paid up to the day the vessel was launched. Thus, the work was done, and in 1747 and 1748, and in April, Spangenberg and Dick Schuyler of Brunswick, a friend of Spangenberg's, who had himself built many vessels, consulted with Van Deventer, and decided that the launch should be made on the springtide of May. Unquote. On May 29, 1748, at 11 a.m., in the presence of about 1,000 spectators, including Bishops Spangenberg and Hemmerhoff, Henry Antes, Timothy Horsfield, and John and Lisbeth Van Deventer, the shipbuilder and his wife, the Irene, a word meaning peace, was launched from Staten Island, and a lunch was served to the workers. In preparation for the occasion, Bishop Spangenberg presented Lisbeth Van Deventer with 2 pounds with which to purchase a new gown. The Irene's first trip was not far. She was taken from Staten Island to the Old Slip in New York for interior work to be completed. Captain Garrison was put in command, and the Irene needed to be registered. Again from Hemmerhoff's letter to Zinzendorf. At the Naval Office, New York, we have learned the following. First, every ship must have its owner, in whose name the vessel must be registered. If joint owners, all names must appear. No society can own a ship or obtain a register for one. Second, owners of ships must be English-born or naturalized citizens. Third, the owner, when he registers, must take an oath or affirm that he is only or true owner, and that no foreigner has direct or indirect ownership of her. We consulted as to whose name the vessel should be registered in, and selected Henry Antes. He accepted and gave us a declaration of trust. Seems to me that the church sort of skirted the rules on that, didn't they? On July 15, 1748, Abraham Broberg, Moravian agent, registered Irene at the New York Custom House at a cost of 2.2 pounds and described her as follows. Plantation built in the colonies, 80 tons burthen or cargo capacity, mounted with 2 guns and navigated by 9 men. Dimensions were not required, so no dimensions were actually given. Zinzendorf instructed Captain Garrison to load cargoes for outward voyages. The following advertisement was placed in the June 24, 1748 New York Gazette. For Amsterdam direct, the Snow Irene, Nicholas Garrison master, will sail by the 1st of August next at furthest. For freight or passengers, agree with said master at the house of Jarvis Brinkerhoff. In her paper, Commerce, that the Lord could sanctify and bless, Moravian participation in transatlantic trade, 1740 to 1760, published in the book Pious Pursuits, German Moravians of the Atlantic World, Catherine Engel writes the following. When she was not needed in her missionary capacity as a Gemeinship or congregation ship, The church leased cargo space to both Moravian and non-Moravian merchants. Between 1750 and 52, and then again from 1755 to 57, the ship made a total of 6 transatlantic round trips, never with more than 16 Moravian passengers. Thus, while the Moravians purchased the ships in order to protect the souls of their travelers and to connect their distant congregations, the prospect for profit from owning such ships did not escape them. And with the Irene, they made a substantial investment in the Atlantic economy as well as in their own society. Unquote. New York Moravian Henry Van Vleck managed the Irene while she was in Port, New York. Van Vleck, from his shop on Wall Street, arranged freight and passengers for the trip to Europe and sold the goods when she returned. Van Vleck's counterpart in London was successful merchant and Moravian Claudius Nesbitt. When news of Irene's arrival in New York reached Bethlehem, single brethren were sent to New York to help unload cargo and lead the colonists safely to Bethlehem. Often advertisements would be placed in the New York Gazette and Post by Henry Van Vleck and others selling merchandise brought over on the Irene, including Captain Garrison's advertising Holland bricks cheap for ready money. Another interesting thing to note is that although most passengers on the Irene were bound for Pennsylvania, she never, as we will see, set port in Philadelphia. According to Bishop Swangenberg, it was found impractical for our Captain Garrison, who was born near New York and has a large acquaintance with the merchants of that city, for he can more readily obtain freight from there than Philadelphia, passengers alone not being sufficient. Another serious matter is that the merchants of Philadelphia own their vessels. Unquote. Irene's first voyage. For Irene's first voyage, a few non-Moravian passengers, as well as a cargo of sugar, rice, and coffee, were secured, and on August 31st, 1748, Bishop Camerhoff held a farewell levee for officers and crew. The Irene set off on September 8, 1748, with Captain Nicholas Garrison, commander, Christian Jacobson, mate, and 7 crew members. She arrived at Texel, Netherlands on November 1st. While in Europe, she picked up the John Mitchman colony, the largest ever brought over on a Moravian transport. At this same time, Zinzendorf was in England with a petition to Parliament seeking, to quote from Bishop Hamilton's History of the Moravian Church, unequivocal recognition of the Moravian Church in Great Britain. Moravians in England had suffered years of persecution. Accused of being disloyal to the Protestant Church, Zinzendorf wanted to end this, and also wanted assurance that, when in America, the Moravians would be exempt from taking judicial oaths and serving in the military. There was strong opposition to this petition in Parliament until on January 11, 1749, the Irene arrived in London with the 150 colonists making up the John Mitchman colony, as well as 3 Eskimo converts, all bound for Pennsylvania. Their appearance excited interest in the Parliament and resulted in the creation of a parliamentary committee to investigate the legitimacy of the Moravian Church in England. In June 1749, a bill was signed by George II, legally recognizing the Moravian Church in Great Britain. The Irene sailed from London on March 1st, 1749, and arrived in New York May 12th, carrying the John Mitchman colony. Their arrival was noted in the New York Gazette. We hear that the Snow Irene, Captain Garrison, has arrived at Sandy Hook from London with upwards of 100 passengers on board of the Moravian Brethren. The colony included 40 single brothers and 48 single sisters. It's interesting to look at the occupations the single brothers had: joiner or carpenter, weaver, fringe and lace maker, and bookbinder, just to name a few. These brethren were specifically selected because of their skill sets, occupations that would be needed in a new settlement. It is also interesting to note that on July 15, 1749, 28 couples of the colony were married in Bethlehem in what was known as the Great Wedding. The second voyage, Irene sailed from Staten Island on June 21st, 1749, and arrived at New Parenthood, Greenland on July 30th. She carried lumber and other materials for the mission, as well as Christian David, missionaries Brother and Sister Stock, and the 3 converts, Judith, John, and Matthew. She arrived back in New York on August 29th. On October 15, 1749, Irene sailed from New York carrying Bishops Spangenberg, Mitchman, and von Watteville, arriving in London November 21st, making the passage in only 30 days. She had an equally impressive return trip leaving Dover May 1750 and arriving in New York June 22nd. Aboard, she carried the Henry Lord of the colony, among whom were 6 single brethren who would make up half of the first group of the Moravians to settle in Wachovia. And I've put them in bold. Heinrich Feldhausen, Erich Ingebretson, Jacob Lung, Christopher Merkley, Hans Petersen, and Friedrich Jacob Pfeil. Jacob Lung recounted his trip on the Irene in his memoir, held here in the archives and translated by Kenneth Hamilton. Quote, on February 16, 1750, I received from Brother Johannes a call to go to America, and I gladly accepted immediately. I left on the 23rd of that month with the 4th company, that is the 4th Sea Congregation, composed of exiles from Herrenhammer. We reached Zeist on March 4th and stayed there until April 17th when we boarded the Irene. When I looked up a little stanza for this my journey, it read, Lord Jesus, take thy child through threatening winds and wild, me cradle in thy care, safe through the waters piled. Stand at my side over there, the witness for thee, let me ever be. On the 19th, we sailed from Holland and reached Dover Harbor on the 27th. From here, we were conveyed to London to the late disciple Zinzendorf, and there the late Christian Renatus von Zinzendorf spoke with me for the last time. On May 9th, we sailed from England, and on June 21st, we had sighted land again. It was America, and I was grateful to the Lord for this prosperous and speedy journey. The watchword read, Sing unto the Lord a new song. On the 24th, when we went ashore, it read, Give thanks to the Lord of Lords, who doeth great wonders. Irene's 4th voyage. On August 20, 1750, the Irene set sail from New York for Europe. In addition to the crew and Captain Garrison, on board were his wife Mary Ann and 5 passengers from Bethlehem, Laurentius Nyberg and his wife Patty, Nathaniel Seidel, David Seisberger, and Christian Bernba. Not to mention several animals, including a young bear captured in Ganadamy. On September 21st, they encountered a severe storm, which nearly sank the Irene. The following is from an eyewitness account written by Brother Nyberg. The wind sprung up from the northeast so violently that the sailors hardly got into sails before the hurricane blew so hard that we could no more run before the wind, the vessel not obeying the helm anymore. The raindrops cut the sailors' skin like sharp pins. The waves soon grew to mountains, and though it was day, the air was as thick and dark as the night. Soon after, one of our horses fell down and was thrown overboard. About 11, the last horse stooped into the deep, but also returned again to the ship and had his feet on the gunwale, the ship laying on one side. It was a pity indeed to see the poor creature in that condition. About this same time, all our fowls, about 70 in number, were gone, and only some pigs, 2 geese, and a young bear were left alive. After 12, the captain came down in great consternation, flung himself in the bed, saying, Now let the land be the captain. Nathaniel looked out once more and said, Dear hearts, I believe the land will fetch us in this moment. I called to my Patty and asked whether she was ready for going. She said yes, but I don't believe we shall go yet. Nicholas came down most spent, so we seated ourselves in one row, being determined to go hand in hand to our Savior. We only wish that our dear hearts in Bethlehem knew of our circumstances. I cannot enough thank the Lamb for that calmness and serenity of mind he gave me in those junctures. At 1 o'clock, we heard a violent crack, as if we struck on a rock, and it made the vessel tremble like a leaf for 2 minutes. The bowsprit broke near the ship. The foresail, then having lost its hold, the foremast broke, and falling down broke the foreyard. In the same moment, down tumbles the main topmast, and broke in its fall the main and main top, so that the whole bunch hanging in shrouds fell overboard. And a miracle it was that it did not overset the vessel, such a weight hanging on one side. Then it was resolved to cut the shrouds, but the sea made it almost impractical, till Brother Shelton got a line, twisted it twice around Brother Jacobson, that dear man, and held one end and another side of the other end. And so Jacobson, swinging to and fro on the deck with an axe in his hand and a rope around him, cut the shrouds so the ship was made lighter and rose a little again, to the great joy of our cabin company. The mast being gone, the poor ship left to the discretion of an enraged sea, rocked so violently that everything in the cabin turned upside down. The storm still increasing till towards 10 o'clock the following day, when it grew more moderate, so that one could look out again. Such a sight I never saw, like a burned-down castle, with only some stumps of masts standing, the shrouds cut, and part of the sails, all our fowls dead and horses gone. There we drove like Noah's Ark in a very pitiful condition." Unquote. The Irene miraculously made it to England, where she was repaired at Dover, though we do not know the details of the repair. And she eventually arrived back in New York on September 26, 1751, with 8 passengers, including Johann Michael and Gertrude Braun. Johann Michael Braun would later serve with Accra and Salem. Fifth Voyage. She sailed from New York November 22, 1751, with John Hitchman, Henry Yorda, and 8 others on board, and arrived back in New York from Dover May 17, 1752, with 8 passengers, including Jacob Rogers, an English pastor who would later serve with Accra. And then she had a couple more voyages. From New York, July 6, 1752, and returned from London, November 20th, with 22 passengers, including 17 single sisters. Her 7th voyage. From New York, April 5th, 1753, and returned from London, September 9th, 1753, with 34 passengers, including 23 single brethren, among whom were Hans Martin Tauberlein, who was not only one of the first settlers of Wachovia, but also the first physician in Wachovia, and Ludolf Gottlieb Bachhoff, who would one day serve and teach at the Fenian Friedberg, and John Jacob Fries, who would serve the Accra. Among the non-Moravian passengers on this voyage was a man named Josiah Hornblower and his crew, who had in their possession something rather remarkable, the first steam engine ever used in America. Built by his brother Jonathan, the Newcomen steam engine was bound for the Schuyler copper mine in New Jersey. William Nelson, in his 1883 book, Josiah Hornblower and the First Steam Engine in America, wrote the following, quote, "The ship Irene had been built on Staten Island 5 years before for the transportation of Moravians to their mission in the New World. The vessel was most appropriately named Irene, for she was indeed a messenger of peace. On this voyage she bore to America the means of utilizing a power which was destined to have a scarcely less potent influence in civilizing the New World than the gospel itself, which the little ship had been built to carry to the heathen." Nothing was said of the extraordinary freight brought over on the stout little craft. The laws of England at that time strictly prohibited the exportation, even to the colonies, of artisans or machinery calculated to build up industries that might rival those of the mother country. Unquote. Whether or not Captain Garrison knew he had contraband on the ship is unclear. But from further reading, it appears to get around the English laws, the steam engine was officially referred to as a fire engine in the paperwork. Eighth voyage. The Irene sailed from New York on November 3rd, 1753, and again from Gravesend, England, March 15th, 1754, arriving in New York April 14th. The quickest western voyage she ever made, being the 3 Sundays at sea. Her passengers included Bishop Spangenberg, Johann Valentine Haidt, the artist, and John Etwein, who would serve the Cabra. Now, 1754 marked the beginning of the French and Indian War in North America. Upon arrival in New York, Bishop Spangenberg set about ascertaining the sense of the crew regarding impressment into the Royal Navy. Impressment, or press gangs, was the practice of forcing men into military or naval service through coercion or force. Many merchant sailors, because of their skill, were pressed into service with the Royal Navy. The Impressment Act of 1746 made this a legal practice in North America. And with the start of the French and Indian War, it was expected for the practice to begin in earnest in New York. Fortunately, the Moravian sailors escaped the rigors of the act, which reached its peak in New York in 1757. For her ninth voyage, the Irene sailed on May 29, 1754, and again from London, September 22nd, arriving in New York November 16, 1754, carrying a colony of single brethren, which included John Jacob Ernst, who would later serve the Cabra and Bethlehem, and Lorenz Baga, who would serve the Cabra. Her 10th voyage, she sailed from New York February 4, 1755, and arrived from London August 11th. On this voyage, Nicholas Garrison Jr. served as master, his father having retired to Harrington. The 11th voyage saw Christian Jacobson, the former first mate, as master of the Irene. She sailed from New York September 28, 1755, and again from England April 6, 1756, arriving in New York June 2nd, carrying 14 single brethren under the charge of Henry Seidel. The 12th voyage was unremarkable. Sailed from New York July 1st, 1756, and again from London September 23rd, arriving in New York December 12th, with 5 Moravian passengers. The 13th voyage. The Irene sailed from New York March 17, 1757. That month, John Campbell, the unpopular commander-in-chief of the British forces in America, placed an embargo on all outbound ships from the colonies. For whatever reason, the Irene was exempt from this embargo and allowed to sail, the only vessel allowed to leave port after the embargo was lifted. She left just in time. During the spring of 1757, the press gangs cleared the taverns and shipyards of New York, seizing more than 800 men and pressing 400 of them into service. The embargo itself, however, was short-lived due to poor crops and food shortage in Ireland and England, which required supplies from the colony. The Irene sailed back from London September 15th, arriving in New York 15 weeks later. 14th voyage. After avoiding political barriers in the spring, the Irene's luck was about to run out. She left New York on November 20th, 1757, and 10 days later was captured by a privateer. The following account was written by Andrew Shelta, former crew member of the Irene, and seeking to spend his remaining days in Europe, was a passenger on this voyage. He wrote, "At noon on the 29th of November, we spotted a vessel to the north, bearing down on us, and soon after hoisting the English flag. Mistrusting the stranger, we showed no colors, but crowded on the sail in the hope of effecting escape. Hereupon the stranger ran up the French flag. It was now a trial to speed," unquote. According to Shelton, the Irene held her own, sailing excellently, but later that night lost speed, and the French ship gained and began firing. Shelton counted 30 shots, not including the volleys from small arms. Now, if you'll recall, the Irene is equipped with 2 guns, but as Daniel Cruz once pointed out, being a Moravian ship with a Moravian crew, no one knew how to fire them. At midnight, the vessel was boarded. Again, Shelton. Captain Jacobson and crew were immediately transferred on board the privateer, which proved to be the Margaret, from Louisburg, Nova Scotia, mounting 8 guns and 8 swivels, and manned by 50 men. The Irene was given charge of the prize crew from the Margaret. At daybreak, we were ordered on deck and were stripped and plundered of all we had on our persons." Unquote. On December 6, 5 more prisoners were taken on board the Margaret, and the Irene was to be taken to Louisburg. Shelton wrote, "For upwards of 4 weeks we cruised about, I may say at the mercy of the winds and waves, for the weather was foul and the prize crew inexperienced in seamanship." Unquote. The remaining crew of the Irene were occasionally asked to help sail the ship, and supplies running low were allowed a quart of water and 3 biscuits a day. Shelton said, "In all this time of harassing uncertainty, we did not fail to meet in the evenings for singing, and on Saturday for praying the litany. One day our bosun came to me and proposed that we should make an attempt to overpower our captors, cut down those who should resist, secure the others, and then run the Irene into the nearest English port. To this I would not consent, but instead encouraged him to place his trust in God." Unquote. Things continued much the same for the Irene until January 12, now 1758, when on a foggy morning land, Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia, was spotted. Initially, the prize crew set back out to sea, but then changed their minds and decided to make for land. Brother Shelton tried to, quote, dissuade them from so unseamanlike a course in foggy weather, and told them that they would certainly lose the vessel. As they would not listen to my protest, I prepared for the worst. At 2 p.m., breakers were reported ahead, and very soon we were among them and struck a rock. The second time we struck, the rudder and part of the keel were broken off, and 3 feet of water was reported in the hold. The Frenchmen became so demoralized that I ordered the lifeboat launched, into which we got all, 22 in number, and rowed for the shore, which we reached in safety, but wet to the skin. On landing, the French captain fell upon my neck, kissed, and thanked me for saving the lives of all. We next entered the woods, made a fire, and on returning to the boat for provisions, found that it had drifted back out to sea. The next morning, only the masts of the Irene were to be seen above water." Unquote. Brother Shelton and other prisoners were taken to St. Pierre, Nova Scotia, where on account of his poor health, he was allowed to remain. The others were taken on to Louisburg, where they met with Captain Jacobson, and then were taken to Brest, France, and imprisoned. There they were released on parole after 5 days, went to Belgium, and stayed until their parole was up 9 months later. Brother Shelton was later taken to Louisburg, where he spent time in between the prison and the hospital, and eventually was given a job as a gardener. In June, the British began to attack the city, which resulted in a French surrender on July 26th. The next day, all prisoners were released. On September 2nd, 1749, Brother Shelton finally obtained passage to New York, finally arriving in Bethlehem on September 29th, 10 months after the capture of Irene. News of the Irene's capture and sinking did not reach Bethlehem until May 19, 1758. Jordan noted, "The trustees of the Irene at the time of her loss, Henry Van Vleck of New York, Nicholas Garrison Sr. of Bethlehem, Charles Metcalf of London, and Timothy Horsfield of Bethlehem. When captured, Henry Van Vleck estimated her cargo, including indigo and coffee, at 40,000 pounds. Irene's accounts were finally settled May 31st, 1763, and disappeared from the books." In the end, the ship itself was a total loss. After the loss of Irene, the church had another ship built in 1760 named Hope. She only brought 2 colonies over and was used mostly for freight. The fate of the Hope is unknown. Catherine and Will wrote, the Irene turned out to be the community's most successful investment in Atlantic shipping, both in terms of the number of transported Moravians and the return on capital investment. At a love feast in Bethlehem in 1762, Bishop Spongenberg reviewed the immigration of the past 26 years. He stated that of the 600 and more brethren and sisters who immigrated, but 1 died, a remarkable instance of divine protection. The Irene and her crew were certainly given divine protection over her lifetime, surviving storms, war, contraband, press gangs, and though the ship herself was lost, in the end, her crew survived and her story endures. Thank you. And the images that you've seen, the drawings of Irene, were actually drawn by Benjamin Garrison, who was the son of Captain Nicholas Garrison.